Hey there, I'm Amy Connell. Welcome to Graced Health, the podcast for women who want simple and grace filled ways of taking care of themselves. I am a certified personal trainer and nutrition coach who wants you to know your eating, movement, and body don't have to be perfect. You just need to be able to do what you're called to do. I am really excited to have Jessica Volant here in part two of our two-part series on hysterectomies. Jessica is really going to walk us through the physicality of you've had a hysterectomy, now what to expect in our body. Let me tell you really quickly about Jessica. She is a physical therapist, a certified Pilates instructor, and for over 20 years. Through her own journey with endometriosis, I should be able to say that a little bit better, infertility, prolapse, and hysterectomy, Jessica has developed programs to help encourage and empower women going through the same struggles. She has a wildly popular YouTube channel, Jessica Volant Pilates, as well as an online fitness membership community called Unlimited. She lives in Denver with her husband and two kids, and you can oftentimes find her sipping coffee in the sun, which sounds heavenly.
That's my favorite thing to do. Yes.
Yes. Jessica, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited to have this, and I'm really grateful. Hysterectomy is something that I have not walked through, but a lot of my community has, or they are in these conversations with their doctors to figure out if this is the next right step. So let's just start by sharing your story. I think it's always the most powerful when we can connect with other people's stories and we kind of know the background. You have had a hysterectomy, and I will let you take it from there if you don't mind just sharing the story
Oh,
behind that.
sure. So I always like to start with my age as well. I'm 45 years old. I just say that because it helps people kind of understand hysterectomy can happen at many different times in life. So I was 41 when I had my hysterectomy. And when I was 25, I was diagnosed with endometriosis. So I had surgery. I had years and years of pain and confusing tests. No one knew what was going on. I finally had surgery. I remember opening my eyes, waking up, and them saying, "Well, we found endometriosis. It's not curable. We took out what we could. It's probably going to grow back. You may need a hysterectomy someday, and it's going to be really hard for you to have kids. Have a good day."
And this
Bye-bye.
was at 25?
I was
How
25.
disheartening.
It was a shock. And I will say it's interesting because I was a physical therapist at the time. I was a Pilates teacher. It was so out of the realm of anything I expected from my own life. And I don't think anyone does. Anytime you get a diagnosis, it of course comes out of left field. I went home and I had researched endometriosis, and I remember finding it and almost crying because I'm like, that's what I have. That is what I have. And the things online are really scary about it. And that's a big reason why I do what I do now and try to be transparent with people, because one thing I'll say about hysterectomy and anything you research online about women's health, it can be scary. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of information that contradicts other information out there. So I want people to really feel empowered and know, okay, I'm not alone in this. There are positives that can come out of it. And so from 25 until 42, I went through many, many abdominal surgeries. I had two babies. I was really, really lucky and blessed to be able to have those babies. I went through infertility and IVF, and then I was diagnosed with a prolapse after my first baby. She's almost 10 now. It was another journey I did not expect to have. I didn't know what it was. I had to teach myself and learn a lot. And so I had a grade 3 and 4 prolapse. So between endometriosis and the prolapse, hysterectomy started to become more of a plausible option. I was still trying to get pregnant with our second. So I put it on the back burner. Like, that is not something I'm going to deal with. That's not something I want to even think about right now. So when I was 39, I had our second baby. After 2 rounds of IVF, we were able to have him, and I knew we were done having kids. And I went to see a urogynecologist to say, hey, what's going on with my prolapse? Where am I? I'm done with kids. I need to know just a baseline, just tell me what I'm dealing with. And I came out finding out I had 3 different kinds of prolapse. And I probably needed, including a uterine prolapse. And so because of that and the endometriosis, hysterectomy was, if I was going to have the prolapse treated and have surgery, that was really my only option. And so after a lot of mourning and a lot of praying and a lot of research and a lot of talking to the people in my sphere, that is what I ended up doing. So in November 2019, I had a hysterectomy. I had, and then a major prolapse repair with it. So I had both things done, and I am left with one ovary. So I had everything taken out, both fallopian tubes, cervix, uterus, but I kept one ovary. And that was my choice because I had not been through menopause yet. So I kept an ovary so I could keep my hormones and keep cycling as long as I could naturally. And that was it. That was 3 years ago.
And they are okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot to deal with.
Yep.
I that's clearly, clearly.
Okay.
Okay, so I thank you for sharing that, and I have to imagine, one of the things that I really appreciate right now, and especially with our age group, is as we are aging, we are more apt and willing to share these kind of uncomfortable and awkward conversations. So first, just thank you for sharing that, and I think that there is such a need for people to explain like what has happened, what has
Yep.
happened, and it's not they haven't done anything wrong. It's not,
Yep.
it's
Yes.
just it is what it is, and
Mhm.
then we take the next step to heal from that, however that is. So we are kind of taking this conversation from after surgery
Yep.
and
Okay.
then beyond. So I would love for you to, if you were sitting down with, with someone, with a cup of coffee, and they're like, "What is day one going to be like?
Yep.
What is it going to feel like post surgery?" And then a kind of a secondary question to this that I would have if I were with you
Yep.
is, "Well, I had a C-section. Is it anything like that?"
Good question. Very good question.
So
So,
talk to us
yeah.
some about what we're physically able to do in terms of taking care of ourselves, other
Yep.
people we may be taking care of, all of that.
So the first thing, and this is my umbrella statement about everything that I have to talk about, is be an advocate for yourself. We as women, especially, somehow feel like we're the squeaky wheels when we speak up. And especially when it comes to doctors, we sometimes feel like, oh, they know what they're doing. I'm not going to worry about it. 100,000%, you have to speak up. You have to, before you go into surgery, ask questions. And I have YouTube videos all about this, on what to ask before surgery, what to know after surgery. So you can find resources, but ask exactly what they're doing. Because I personally feel like waking up after surgery, you will already be a step ahead if you knew ahead of time what was happening. Like, what are you
Mhm.
taking out? Are you taking my cervix? Are you not? Like, what can I expect? Is this a vaginal surgery or is it an abdominal incision? There's a lot of questions because hysterectomies are very different. If it's what we call kind of a basic hysterectomy, they can do it vaginally, where they will go in through the vagina and take it out. Otherwise, some people will wake up with an abdominal incision, and the healing is very different for both as well.
Okay.
So, first thing, ask your questions. Don't let the doctor ever leave the room until you have your questions asked and answered. Don't be afraid to be the squeaky wheel. Stand up for yourself. If something doesn't feel right after surgery as well, ask questions. I've worked with people who have had to go back in the hospital afterwards, and I have had to tell them, this isn't okay pain. Call. You need to call and tell them you're feeling this. So, be an advocate, speak up 100%. So the other thing is, it's interesting to compare it to a C-section. C-section and hysterectomy are the number one and number two most common surgeries on women in the United States. And they are,
Hysterectomy is more than C-sections.
nope, they're C-section number one and hysterectomy is number two.
Okay.
Yep.
Got
So
it.
they are the
Okay.
most common.
Okay.
One of the main differences, though, is C-section, you're not under anesthesia. And
Mhm.
with a hysterectomy, you are under general anesthesia. That's another big thing. If you've never had surgery before, as a physical therapist, a big part of what I do is just work with people to understand what anesthesia will do. I tell them, even if you were to be put under anesthesia and the doctor doesn't even touch you with a scalpel and you wake back up, there's still recovery time because anesthesia is just yucky. It's not fun. And so when you wake up, you are going to feel unbelievably groggy. You'll feel very thirsty. You're going to feel a lot of things happening. And that alone takes time to recover from. So I tell people, don't be surprised if even a month after surgery, you feel like a little brain fog, if you feel a little headachy, if you feel emotional, even. those things are very common and normal with anesthesia. So give yourself a lot of grace and a lot of patience and a lot of time to know that this is a major surgery. Because it's so common, we tend to think, oh, I'll just bounce right back. Either the surgeon makes us feel that way, or we have a neighbor who said, oh, it was easy, it's no big deal. It's a big deal at surgery. Every surgery
Yeah.
is a big deal. And so again, give yourself that. So yes, you'll wake up feeling all of those things. My general thing I tell people is you won't feel human for 48 hours. And I've had a lot of surgeries. You just don't feel human for at least 2 days. Like as soon as you get to take your first shower, that's the key to starting to feel better.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah. Yes.
It's a big one. And then with all of that said, with the healing itself, in general, if you had an uncomplicated hysterectomy, meaning surgery went as expected, most of the time you're encouraged to walk immediately. Walking is one of the best things you can do. Again, unless there's something the doctor is telling you otherwise, always listen to your surgeon and your doctor.
Mhm.
But otherwise, walking tends to be one of the best things you can do for circulation, for healing, for digestion and elimination, because that's a big one. Anesthesia will make you constipated. I am here to shout it from the mountaintops because they don't tell you. And it is so uncomfortable. If you've had babies, you know that first time you were on the toilet after giving birth is so scary.
It's
And
so scary.
it's the same after a hysterectomy. And walking helps with that too. So walking you can almost do immediately. And then there's even like pelvic floor exercises. Most of the time we can be doing those just about immediately too. So there are things you can do to just help set yourself up, breathing exercises, those kind of things. And that being said, it took me a week to be able to walk a block. And again, I had a very complicated surgery because of the prolapse repair, but I just did what I could each day. And I had how old were my kids when my I had a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old at home when I had my surgery. And I still got up to make them lunches in the morning. A week later, I was driving them to school. I wasn't lifting them whatsoever. I was following all my restrictions, but I was doing the daily things I needed to do to be a mom with a lot of help from my husband. So when people ask me, can I walk up and downstairs? Yeah, I did. My bedroom was upstairs. The kitchen was downstairs. That was all fine. So you will be functional. You just won't really feel human necessarily doing it. You'll feel weak. You will need to give yourself a lot of rest within that. But when people ask me, oh, do I need to sleep on the same floor as I walk in? Not with a typical hysterectomy, no.
Okay. And I assume that there are a little bit of variations based on your the body that you walk into, right? Like you're a pretty active person.
Yep.
And it may be that someone who is not used to moving and all of that, it might be a little bit of a different story.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. As a physical therapist, we always tell people the stronger you are going into surgery, the better your outcomes after. Research shows us that. So if it's even on the horizon for you, I encourage you to start a walking practice now. Like you don't worry about, big goals like losing weight and all of that. I just mean get into a walking practice. Find some videos on pelvic floor exercises, see a pelvic floor physical therapist before surgery. All of that actually can really help with your outcomes afterwards, because you're exactly right. And also, don't ever take this or what anyone says as, oh, that's what I should be like, because we are all different. And all of us, I have seen complications happen after surgery, and it's not the fault of the patient. It just happens sometimes. So if you do need to sleep on the couch because you don't want to walk up the stairs, do it. Absolutely. Don't make yourself do something you're not ready for. And just know the more you can do beforehand, stay hydrated, all of those things. There's some great books about preparing for surgeries to even set your mindset in the right place. Putting freezer meals together, getting help from family and friends. Do it. Like there are no awards given for being a martyr in this situation. Ask for help.
Yes, that and epidurals as well for people who choose to have those, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think too, that's a really great point, because I would assume in most cases, hysterectomies are scheduled and
Yeah.
you will know several weeks ahead of time. So that's a really great seed that you've planted of what can I talk a lot on here about being kind to your future self. So how
Mhm.
can you be kind to your future self when your future self isn't going to feel so great or, not maybe not as mobile. So
Yep.
I love
100%.
those suggestions that you have
Yep.
there.
Yep.
Now, you mentioned constipation, which is not something you hear people talking about just in general, and I feel like this is probably one of the less discussed side effects
Yep.
of hysterectomies. Talk us through some about how to handle that, and then if there are any other ones that would again sitting down at coffee, you're like, okay, this is what you need to know right here.
This is the real stuff.
Yes.
So yeah, the constipation comes typically from anesthesia and painkillers, which you'll have both if you have a
Mhm.
hysterectomy. So one of the best things ahead of time is staying hydrated. Hydrate, water, electrolytes, all of the things. Ask your doctor too. I tell people this, ask your doctor if they want you to do any kind of liquid fast or diet before surgery. My surgeons, when I've had abdominal surgeries, and I've had 3 now, have always put me on that prior to. And the reason is it clears out your intestines before surgery, which actually then helps if there's any complications during surgery. But I find it really helps with the constipation afterwards too, because I'm already cleaned out as much as I can be. Not all doctors mention this. So I just tell clients just ask. Just ask
Mhm.
if they have any regulations or requirements ahead of time, because that can help. Then have all of the liquids afterwards, bone broth, again, electrolytes, have it all. They will most likely recommend that you are on stool softeners. Follow their recommendations just over the counter. They will have you buy it before surgery so you're ready. Follow that. And then I will say, I'll tell you absolutely what happened to me. This doesn't happen to everyone. Again, I had a complicated surgery, but after my hysterectomy and prolapse repair, I did not go to the bathroom. I didn't go number 2 for a week. And I was in
Oh.
so much pain, and I didn't really know why I was in so much pain. And that wasn't completely abnormal after surgery for me, but it was like had giving birth. I was scared to go. I was in so much pain, and I finally talked to my doctor and I talked to a friend who's a surgeon, and both of them said, "Go to the drugstore and buy an over-the-counter enema that you drink." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And I did it. And all night long, I stayed awake. I was on the toilet all night long, but by the next day, it was like a miracle had happened, and I felt 100% better, and I moved on with my life. And I say that because, again, it's just a part of being an advocate for yourself, because it can be really embarrassing. It can be embarrassing to say, "I haven't pooped for a week." It can be embarrassing to feel that way, and you just feel like it's normal. It's really not. I worked with someone who hadn't urinated for 24 hours after surgery at home. And again, she didn't want to be a squeaky wheel. And I said, "You need to call the surgeon in the hospital immediately." And by that night, she was in the hospital and almost in kidney failure, simply because she didn't want to say anything and be the squeaky wheel. So, those kind of things, yes, tell people you can feel better. It might be normal, but it doesn't mean it's okay to deal with it. Does that make sense? I tell people that, yeah,
Mhm.
it's common, right? It's common to get constipated after surgery, but not going for a week and being in that much pain isn't normal. Don't feel like you just have to deal with it because there aren't answers. There are. Ask
Yeah.
people. But yeah, that's what helped me with the constipation piece. Other things people ask about, or at least they're embarrassed to ask about, is sex after surgery. And
Yeah,
that's
let's talk about that some because I wanted to ask.
I have a whole YouTube video about that. And I'll tell you the funny thing. I asked my husband first. I said, "Are you okay if I make this video? Because I'm going to talk about things." He said, "Sure." And because I had a few people ask me, and I just thought it'd be a nothing video. And I think it was my most popular video for the year because same people have questions.
Yeah.
And so that's something, again, ask your doctor. Don't be afraid to ask because it's a fair question. But most of the time, so there's this kind of myth from a long time ago that having a hysterectomy and having your cervix removed will eliminate your ability to have an orgasm. And that's because they used to believe that a woman's orgasm was caused by the cervix. They don't believe that anymore. So that is something that has been put to the side as not true. So that's something I tell women, you don't have to necessarily worry about that piece. That's why it's there. And then otherwise, it's like giving birth. They tell you pelvic rest for 6 to 10 weeks afterwards. So you won't have sex for 6 to 10 weeks, or again, as long as you're comfortable. I mean, women joke about that 6 weeks afterwards. You're still not really ready for that. It's the same. Do it when you're ready, when you're
Yeah.
ready. But you have to heal. I think there's also, in my opinion, there's a big part of hysterectomy that feels like we are losing a part of what makes us a woman. And I had to deal with that emotionally. My uterus gave me my babies, like the two most important things in my
Yeah.
entire life. My uterus gave me them. And I had to go through a mourning period to say this, and this wasn't my choice. I wanted to have more kids. I couldn't, it really wasn't a choice, but I needed to accept it. And then would I still feel like a woman afterwards? Like it's affecting my hormones, and you get dry and all those things that can feel embarrassing. So I think as long as you can, it took a lot for me to realize I'm not a woman because of that. What makes me feel like a woman or feel sexy, I need to dive deep into finding that femininity or sexuality that is separate from my organs. And so I did some work around that. And I will be completely honest, if you are in a place like with me with endometriosis, prolapse, things that can actually make sex painful, I have found a freedom afterwards, because without some of that pain that I have had my whole life, it's opened up my sexuality a little bit. So I just say that to say, let yourself feel whatever you feel around this issue, but know that having a hysterectomy from a basic anatomical standpoint will not affect sex whatsoever. You will have to heal. It might make you feel different. I mean, I did feel anatomically different. My vagina felt different afterwards. Not good or bad, just different while it healed. But
Mhm.
then you will have this whole new body that you get to explore, and that's yours. And so if you can find some empowerment with that, it can actually almost be the beginning of a second season.
That's a great point that I just lost my train of thought. I've been holding on to it. But it's a really, I appreciate you saying that. Number one, it's, no less of a woman for sure. And how it's, there's a lot of things to set aside, and it can open up some things, and that it, no pun intended. And, sorry. And that it might actually make intimacy better if we've been having pain, if it's been
Yeah,
uncomfortable. So I think I have to imagine that that would be, like you said, a really empowering thing to know that, like, I'm going to make this decision for my body, and it will, so that I can enjoy this aspect of my relationship
right.
better.
Right. Yep. And there is a piece to the vaginal dryness piece and all of that, because again, that's a hormonal issue. So it
Mhm.
will depend. Do you have both ovaries taken out? Do you have one ovary taken out? Are you in menopause? All of that will affect those kind of things, and libido and dryness. And so I always tell everyone, and honestly, whether you're going to have a hysterectomy or not, I believe every woman over the age of 35 should have extensive hormone testing done. And if you can work with a functional medicine doctor simply for a baseline, it's really great information to have. And I'm not on HRT, but I am on certain supplements that the person I'm working with has said, you know what, your estrogen is really high, this is really low. Try these supplements, it might help. And it has. And so there are options out there if you are feeling those things after a hysterectomy.
Okay, so some of these little side effects, like you talked about with
Yes.
dryness and all that, can be managed
Absolutely.
with the help of a functional medicine
Yep.
and supplements or whatever else they may
Yep.
suggest. Good to
Yep.
know.
It can
Really
help.
good to know. Okay, I have a pretty active community in various forums. I mean, they love it all, and which makes me
Yeah.
really happy. Let's talk about exercising and
Yep.
movement, intentional movement, because what I have heard you say is you were able, and I know this is just your experience, right? Like, everybody's going to have their own experience, and you walked in pretty well conditioned. Your body was used to moving, but it sounds like after about a week, you were kind of getting in the groove of, like, day to day stuff. Um, talk to us about exercising, and what can we expect? What are your recommendations? What is realistic, and what is just a pipe dream because we think that we everybody else took this long, but
Yep.
we can do better.
Yep. I love this question. I got a message from someone just yesterday. Oh, sorry, Siri. Siri is talking to me.
That
My
happens to me
watch.
all the time.
So I got a message from someone yesterday, so discouraged and defeated. She was really active beforehand, so active. And it's been 6 weeks since surgery. And why isn't she back to it? And I just had to back everything up and say, whoa, 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 whoa. 6 weeks is nothing in the grand scheme of things of healing from the surgery. Nothing. You will feel again, human again. Hopefully, you're going on some walks and doing some stretching and doing your day to day life. Walking your kids into school, making dinner without getting tired. Though, sitting through that's when I was seeing my first clients again for physical therapy. I was not lifting any weights. I wasn't doing anything close to what I was doing before surgery. So I tell people, understand that this is a long game. Like we're looking at long term. Every step counts, though. You can't just skip to that end game. You don't get to skip the middle of building strength back up again. That's the absolute most important piece to protect your pelvic floor, to build the strength back. Most people will have lifting restrictions. Most surgeries that I hear, mine was no lifting more than 10 pounds for 10 weeks. And sometimes it's less than that, depending on the surgery itself. And again, I had a toddler at home and I was like, I can't lift you. And it's the hardest thing in the world, but I can't. I'm not going to ruin myself. I'm not doing it. But it also, as a physical therapist, doesn't make sense to me to say, okay, you can't lift more than 10 pounds for 10 weeks, but then at 10 weeks, do whatever you want. Like, well, that doesn't make sense. I can't suddenly lift my 30-year-old or 30-pound son at 10 weeks when I've done nothing to prepare for that during those 10 weeks. So I love what you said about intentional, because to me, that is exactly what it has to be. It's intentional, building back up. So yeah, at the end of a week, I was like, oh, I can walk a couple blocks. Like that's what I could do at the end of the week. A week.
Mhm.
That was it. Then I started slowly adding a little more to my walks, a little more to my walks. And then I started doing some of my favorite, really basic mat exercises and stretches that I knew would be safe. And then I think it probably was around 6 weeks that I felt ready to lift 3 or 5 pound dumbbells. That's about where I was, 3 or 5 pound. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to start doing some really small squats, some small lunges, because again, I always think functional. If I want to be able to hike with my family in a week, or I'm sorry, in a month or two, I need to be building some strength in my legs to do that.
Mhm.
And so that's what you want to think about. Like put aside aesthetics. I know it's hard. We want to get our body back. We want all of that. Don't worry about that yet. Right now, you're just building strength to be functional so that when it's time to do your fun sports and activities, tennis, hiking, whatever, you've built the foundation to be super safe and strong and ready to do that. So I tell people it took me, to be honest, a year to be completely safe and free in my workouts again, meaning I wasn't nervous to do certain things. I could do things in a framework of, okay, you've done the work, Jessica. Now you're safe to try this. Like, go try this new class, go do this. It took a year for me to get through a workout and not think about, okay, am I pulling my abs in? Or am I doing this? Is it safe? All the things. And it took me a year to get to that point. So
I
give yourself.
really like, yeah, I really like how you said it took me a year to feel safe and free, because I haven't really had a lot of surgeries, but I had two C-sections, and there's that moment, there's that period of time where you're just protective, and there's like this continuous narrative in the back of your head of, well, am I going to hurt myself? Am I going to make a thing? Is this a good thing? And it's just, I mean, it's right there. So I think that's really good for people to hear that a year seems like a really long time, but like you said, it's a long game, and every step counts, and you've got to take each step. So
Yeah, you do.
that's that's really encouraging, and I hope also kind of grace giving to
Yeah.
people who are feeling like, I had this done 3 months ago. Why aren't I feeling better?
Right, exactly. Because social media nowadays tells us otherwise, right? We see all the people doing all the things right away after having babies and having surgeries. It is not true. 100%. It's either a lie or it is just a crazy outlier who can do that. That is not truth. And then the other side is don't be afraid to move, because we can fall into that category too, where, oh my gosh, I'm too afraid. Am I going to hurt myself? And I have heard from people 6 years after hysterectomy saying, can I work out yet? And I want to shake the doctor for not giving better instructions. Um, so, yes, as long as it is intentional and purposeful, move that body. Our bodies were meant to move. And honestly, there's not, unless you're out there schlepping around 20-pound bags of mulch, right after surgery, or lifting that car seat, as long as you're following your lifting restrictions from the doctor, there aren't a lot of things you can do that are going to hurt the surgery itself. You might be sore, you might stretch something too much, but most of us aren't out there doing Olympic weightlifting, right? We're just trying to live our life. So as long as it's purposeful, intentional, you do have to move that body again. That's what we're meant to do. We're meant to move.
Yes. Yes. This is not news to my community. And I'm so glad that you said that same thing. And I mean, we do need to move. And there's so much, there are a lot of benefits of the movement too, because then your blood is flowing. It's carrying the nutrients. It's getting what your body needs to heal to where it needs to go when we're moving. So I completely agree with that. One of the reasons I specifically wanted you to come on and have this conversation is you have created this program to really help women through this phase that we're talking about, the after surgery and kind of getting back on the road to exercising again. I have heard a lot of, like, well, my doctor said I can't work out for 10 weeks.
Mhm.
And then you just stop. And then, oh, well, after in 11 weeks, yeah, like you said, I can go hiking with my family. I can go, we get to go water skiing. We get to, like all, or whatever it is. And maybe point A to point M is really not the most realistic or feasible way. We've got it. So you're going to take us through the points in between. So tell us some about your program and how we can grab that.
Awesome. It's created, and it's a 10-week program because I wanted it, exactly like you said, to follow that time when most of us are on those lifting restrictions. And it's meant to start the day after surgery. And so each week is broken. It's a 10-week calendar. There are links to workouts and instructions within each week, and each week has a theme. So the first week is just breathing, getting that pelvic floor moving again. So it's workouts you can do in the hospital bed or at home in bed. And then it tells you kind of how to build up your walking as well and what days to try walking. And so, yeah, we start with pelvic floor, and then eventually we work into around week 6. We'll start adding some weights and some bands, and it's very intentional. And by the 10th week, you are working in standing, balance, some weights. You're working your core even at some point, so that then after that, you do have the freedom to say, okay, this is my chosen activity: Pilates, yoga, tennis, water skiing, whatever it is. I feel so much more prepared to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other side is I find it just gives people that encouragement of, oh, there is something I can do. I think a lot of times we feel like we've lost ourselves and our identity a little bit after any kind of surgery, especially hysterectomy. And if we're told we can't move, and if moving is a big part of our life, it's like, well, what am I supposed to do then? And this really gives that outlet of, oh, I can move. I can find connection to my body again. It's not some stranger's, it's mine. And this is how I can do it safely. You can do it without worry.
Yeah. Though I just wrote down, you can tell that I take a lot of notes: agency and ownership over our body, where we can do what feels right. We can take those next steps in order to get to where we want to be in a very meaningful and realistic time frame. That's
Yeah.
really great. I will put the link in the show notes, but Jessica, say where, if you don't mind just saying the link, or where people can get this.
Sure. Go to jessicavallantpilates.com. That's my website. And you'll see at the top, there's a women's health link with a hysterectomy resource. And if you click the hysterectomy page, you'll see all of my hysterectomy resources there. So all my free YouTube videos, my story, everything. And then if you scroll to the bottom, the workout plan is there. So just go to
Great.
jessicavallantpilates.com and
Yeah.
find hysterectomy.
And that's V as in Valentine,
Yes.
ALANT. Yes, that's great. Okay, I have a couple questions I ask all my guests.
Okay.
The first is I love learning about people's tattoos. In fact, I was
Mhm.
just on a girls' weekend and our waiter was he just had this huge sleeve. And I said at the very end, I was like, okay, I really like learning about
Mhm.
tattoos. And I find that people normally, when they will put something on their body for the rest of their life, they will have meaning behind it. And
Mhm.
his face lit up. It was so cool. So I'm
Oh,
like, this is such a fun question to get to know
yep.
people. So I was wondering if you had any tattoos, if you would mind sharing what it is and the meaning behind it. If you don't have one, but you had to get one, what would it be and where would it go?
So I got my first tattoo on my 45th birthday last month, actually.
Oh,
And
great timing.
can you see it? Where's the camera?
There we go. Oh, it's on the inside. Yes.
And it's the word hope
Hope. I see it.
right there on the inside of my arm. Yep,
Yes.
in
I
cursive.
love that.
Mhm.
Is there a
Yeah.
meaning behind it?
It's my favorite word.
Mhm.
It's always been my favorite word. And after everything that happened in 2020, it was a hard time for everyone. And it was a
Mhm.
hard time for me personally. And I think turning 45 and coming out of that, it felt like that's what I wanted to continue to focus on. It was a mantra I could just remind myself of every day.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Okay, you've already shared how people can connect with you over at Jessica Valant Pilates, and then I will put your other links down in the show notes so people can check you out there. And we're going to let you finish this time out. What is the one simple thing you would like my community to remember about this conversation? It can be big, it can be small, but just one simple thing.
That you are in charge of your body, even when it feels like it's out of control, even when it feels like it's not a choice you made. Most of us don't choose to have a hysterectomy. Most of us don't choose to have surgery. Most of us don't choose to have pain, but we have this body and this vessel that we've been given, and you can take ownership over it again and find a way to feel safe in it and to feel confident in your ability to walk through this life in this body. And that's always what I want people to take away is a feeling of empowerment over the possibilities.
That's fantastic. Amen. All right, that is all for